So, good morning and Shavua Tov. We continue today our discussion of David Tzvi Hoffmann from last week. And I would remind us quickly that he was born in then Hungary, nowadays Slovakia, in a small place named Verbo or Verba or Vero or different names. But that's, when these places are changing hands, usually they also change names. And he was a prodigy. He was a very, 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 very smart young boy, and he was sent to great yeshivot, and he had the merit to meet with the three great authorities, German authorities, rabbinic authorities of his time, who were Rabbi Ilzheimer, Rabbi Ilzheimer, and Rav Bamberger, the Würzburger Rav, and Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, of course. Each one of them representing a different way of dealing with modernity, with Rav Bamberger as the model for trying to continue the old traditions into modernity and trying to include every Jew in the community regardless of his observance, and even when the non-observant are the majority. So he would try to still, obviously, to keep a very, very strict halacha, according to halacha, but to try to preserve the institutions of the old Jewish, Ashkenazic Jewish community, which were 1,000 years old already in his time. So that is Rav Bamberger, what he was modeling. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was almost the opposite reaction to modernity. He said, no, we must. In two ways, he was the opposite. On one hand, he was in favor of separating from reform. He was they didn't call themselves reform. In many senses, they were becoming reform because he was Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was creating orthodoxy. So when he was petitioning the German government to acknowledge him and his community, Frankfurt community, as a separate entity altogether from the old Jewish community, then he was identifying himself as Orthodox. So in nature, it had to be that they would now identify themselves as Reform. So the old just Jewish tent was not big enough to cover everyone. So that was on one hand, very different from Rav Bamberger. On the other hand, Rav Hirsch was in favor of studying in the German universities, and he was in favor of being loyal German citizens to the highest degree. And again, that was not Rav Bamberger, because Rav Bamberger was an old-fashioned Jew. So he was in favor of insularity. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was in favor of being very, not very open to modern culture. We need to be careful with that, but to some degree open to general culture. But on the other hand, I guess because he knew the general culture so well, he also thought that in your home, you need to be very defensive against it. So again, very, very different type of Yahadut, orthodoxy of observance to halacha that was represented by Rav Bamberger on the one hand, and Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch on the other hand. And the third model that he met was with Rav Ilzheimer, Rav Ilzheimer, who he considered as Mori Rabbi, meaning as his Rebbe, and he was modeling Torah imada. So if Rav Bamberger was Torah im Am Israel, we will say, and Rav Hirsch was Torah im derech eretz, with the way of the world or the way of the country, Rav Ilzheimer was all in favor of Torah imada, and he believed that if you would be able to combine the scientific methods and the scientific way of thinking with halakha and with Torah, then you would not have the same problems with the young generation leaving the fold. He believed that the young are leaving because they are not being given intellectual enough Yahadut, intellectual enough Torah. And that's why they are abandoning the way of faith. That was what Rav Ilzheimer believed in. And if you just give them the right response, then they would not have to go to the reform, and the whole problem would not even begin. And in many senses, that's what we spoke about in length last week. Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann is the greatest exemplar of what Rav Ilzheimer was trying to encapsulate, and that was really this combination of Torah in Mada, someone who has excellence in both the field of Torah and being a halachic authority. We speak about that today, Mirzi Hashem, halachic authority that was acknowledged beyond Germany, which is something that almost did not exist for almost 100 years. Someone that would be learning in Germany and would then be acknowledged outside of it as halachic authority. Shimshon Raphael was a great man. I don't think that I need to press it here, but he had a short, a Responsa that was published named Shemesh Marpeh, and very nice tshuvot. But in the end, that was not where he was shining. He was shining in his Perush Torah and his philosophy writings and in his leadership, but not necessarily in his halachic writings. That's just the nature of things. But Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann, to this day, his melamed loyal is being used by all types, which is very interesting. On the other hand, he also had excellency in his PhD department, right? It's not English department, but in his German department. And again, his research, his studies are being used in the extent that things in science are being used 100 years later, but to the extent that they are used, they are used. And his PhD was in Semitic language. I think I mentioned it last week. And some of his ideas are still circulating around, somewhere acknowledged as foundational to the fields of science, which, again, I hope that we'll be able to speak about it at least in a few minutes, briefly, during this shiur. So they're recognized as foundational. So he was the exemplar. As I think I mentioned, after a very short time that he was in the position in the school by Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and again, they respected each other to a degree, but in the end, Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch published a sharp critique of the PhD that was written by, the thesis that was written by Reb David Tzvi Hoffmann about Shmuel, the Amora Shmuel, and then an offer came in, a proposal for a position came in from Rav Ilzheimer, because Rav Ilzheimer was establishing his Bet Midrash in Berlin, his Bet Midrash LeRabbanim, the rabbinical seminary, and it was an immediate yes for Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann, who was happy, I guess, to leave the not so easy relationship that he had now with Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and to rejoin his old Rebbe in the attempt to create this institution that would combine science and Yahadut and Judaism and would save, redeem the generation. I think that's what they were really believing in and hoping for. And he's going there and he's becoming a teacher there. And after a few years, that's in 1873, he becomes a teacher in the seminary. And in 1890, maybe 1889, Rav Ilzheimer is becoming old, and he's becoming sick, he's becoming weak, and he's asking Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann to replace him in his position as the head of the seminary. And slowly but surely, Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann is taking the mentor, taking the different positions that Rav Ilzheimer was fulfilling. And after another 10 years, in 1899, Rav Ilzheimer is niftar, and Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann became the formal head of the rabbinical seminary, a position he held to his death in 1921. So for 21 years, he was the head of the rabbinical seminary. And what I would like to speak about today is about this period in his life, which is, we may say, the prime period of his life, from 1873 to 1921, in which he produced most of the literature that we now have from him, and was leading the German Orthodox Jewry of his time, and in this very interesting attempt, as I said, to combine Mada with Torah and to produce an intellectual answer to the challenges of modernity. Yeah, for sure.
So what was the logical difference between the outlook of
So Rav Hirsch believed in. Yes, you're right. So that's why I'm trying to step in Torah in Derech Eretz and Torah in Mada. So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch believed that when you learn Torah, at least that's the way he wrote it. I'm not sure it's even possible, but he believed that you should only come with the tools of Torah to learn Torah. You must not use the scientific method in order in your Torah learning. He emphasized it very much. That's why he very much disliked the historicism that was represented by Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann and by others less observant that tried to read Torah and the Torah שבכתב and the Torah שבעל פה with through historical lenses. So he opposed it very, very much. That was one thing. He was in favor, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was in favor of inculating the German culture to what he saw as his highest revelations, we may say, and it is through its literature and some of its ethics. That's what he was trying, and its philosophy. That was what he was after. Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann was a very different type. He was much less after philosophy. He had some what you may call as philosophy writings, but he was much more. He was a Yeki of the old generation in the sense that he was in favor of meticulously going line after line and investigating and only coming to conclusions that you can support them with what can be seen as solid evidence. If you know the way, the writing style and content of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, you know that that is not his style. His style is taking an idea, he's taking a pasuk, and he's kneading it, and he's working with it, and he's creating from it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. What is interesting many times is that while he is saying again and again that Torah should be learned from within Torah, you are reading what he is writing as what are the conclusions of Torah from Torah, and so many times it seems to, at least to us, comes very near to the highest ideals of the German culture of the time. So that's in itself is very, very telling, I think. Reb David Tzvi Hoffmann was someone that would say, you know, we can read only what is written inside. Now, again, is that possible? One may say that's not, and he himself admitted in that, but that's why he was much more into history, in which, again, we all know, and that's a shiur that is 50% history, 50% Torah, or maybe I hope that is more or less it's the combination here. And we all know that history is not objective. It's not as science as physics is science. Maybe even physics is not as science as physics are science. But history is obviously not. It's always the question of what do you omit and what do you speak about? What is the narrative that you are telling from the facts? And even if you only use everything you say is correct and true, there is always the question of what do you spin out of it? And Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann was an historian. He was not a philosopher. And I think that may be the best way to describe the differences between these two people. And also, I may add that Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was much more, he was a philosopher on one side, but he was a man of doing. He was an ish ha'maaseh. So he was establishing communities, and he was speaking with the government, and he was creating in that sense, of the social sense. Reb David Tzvi Hoffmann was also doing these type of things, but he was much more into learning, Reb David Tzvi Hoffmann, than Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. So the Judaism that he was creating there was much more if I would say egghead, that would be something that is negative. Not necessarily. An egghead Judaism, so much more intellectual, much more, so it's a different, yeah, erudite, that would be the word, so much more intellectual. Now again, I hope that Reb Shimshon Raphaelish may take offense with what I just said. Oh, I'm also an intellectual. And he was. I mean, we speak about Germany here. So everyone's intellectual, but in a very different, everyone is a doctor. That's right. Reb Shimshon Raphaelish was not a doctor, by the way. But he studied in university, but he was not a doctor. David Zvi Hoffmann was a PhD, he was a professor. This is, I think that's another difference between them of what are you creating. Reb David Zvi Hoffmann believed that that at least the Rabbanim, but also the people should be very knowledgeable in Halacha and Talmud. And if you look at the schools that were created by Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and we spoke about it at least in some words last week, even when they learned Torah, not necessarily it was Talmud and Gemara. His schools were not known for creating a great Torah and Talmud giants. That's just the nature of things. That's I hope I'm speaking. I hope that it would be clear that I'm not chas v'chela criticizing any of the giants of Torah. I'm just trying to describe what was created. I'm sure if you ask Reb Shimshon Raphaelish, do you want your students to be giants of Talmud? Of course you would say yes. But with the means that he had and the challenges that he had to face, he thought that it is better for them to learn Torah with his Perush, which would give them the philosophical and ethical meaning, and not necessarily the sugyot of the Talmud that would give them more of a halachic basis. That's just the way that he chose to confront the challenges of the time. Okay. So now what I would like to do in order to get some familiarity with what Reb David Zvi Hoffmann was producing in these 30 years, as I said, from 1870, it's more, 50 years, from 1873 to 1921, I would like to read with you some words that he himself, we would begin with some words from his son, and then some words that he himself wrote, and I hope that would give us some, at least general knowledge about him. So let's begin with the introduction of his son to the shoot, the Responsa, which I wanted to bring here and I forgot. So his Responsa, the Melamed להועיל, that was the name of the Responsa. It was published after the death of Reb David Zvi Hoffmann, but as we will see, he prepared some of it in some form. Let's read the introduction. So the son is writing the following. I would share the screen. It's in source bet. מרגלא היה בפומא של אבי מורי זצ"ל. So the son writes that his father was used to say the following. So it's in Latin, nulla sine linea. I hope that I'm not butchering it too much. So no day should pass upon you without writing something new. And as was his way in life, he would say and do. Again, this is the Yekish way, right? If you are saying something, you are doing it. You do not say that you begin the shiur at 9, that you begin at 10 minutes past 9. That is not Yekish, right? So if you say that you do something, you are doing. So he said that you'd write something new every day, and he did. And there were 4 pamphlets, ארבעה קונטרסים, 4 notebooks, we may say, של דברי תורה, that he worked upon during his life. אך בתוך הכתבים שנשארו אחרי מותו נמצאו רק 3 ואחד. אבל it says, so we have lost 1 of the notebooks, which is a misfortune, obviously. In these notebooks, he would write every day, every and each day, חידושי תורה שנתחדשו על ידו, things, novelties, that he was thinking, creating, פלפולים, פירושים על סוגיות הגמרא בחלקי הלכה ואגדה. So he would write his חידושים both in הלכה and in אגדה. מקום חשוב בייחוד תפסו כמה וכמה תשובות המובאות לפניו מתלמידיו רבני אשכנז ושאר מכיריו מיודעיו מקרוב ומרחוק, וידוע למקורביו כי היה בדעתו בימי זקנותו להוציאם לאור הדפוס. So he was extremely proud of some answers that he wrote to his students, because as I said, he was the head, beginning the teacher, and then the head of the rabbinical seminary. So he had, I guess, hundreds of rabbis that he ordained and that later served in different rabbinical positions. I think I already mentioned here more than once the joke that they were telling about the graduates of the new rabbis in the US, that on every smicha, on every ordination, on the back, you would have the phone number of Reb Moshe Feinstein. And I guess the same happened there in Germany. They didn't have phones yet, but they would have the address of the melamed להועיל of Reb David Tzvi Hoffmann. And if you are just a small rabbi in some city and a difficult question would present itself, you have how would you know? You don't have even the library that we have here in the show. We have to understand the limits. And let's say that's someone that learned in the rabbinical seminary for 6 years. But, he learned for 6 years. He also had his degree. And he's not necessarily the greatest Talmid Chacham of their generation. And the question sometimes will be very difficult. In Gittin, in Kiddush, it can be an aguna question. How can a small rabbi of a shul answer such a question? So what he would do, of course, he would send the question to his Rebbe. So, and the Rebbe would answer, and from this responsa, mainly from these answers, Reb David Tzvi Hoffmann collected these answers, as wrote them down in his notebooks, and he wanted to print them. אך בנבטנותו הגדולה היה אומר שזקוק הוא לזמן של 3 שנים לכל הפחות, בכדי לעיין בהם ולחזור עליהם, לתקנם ולשכללם. כדי שיהיו כולם דברי חפץ בהם. But he never published them in his life. Why? That's the Yekish mentality. You cannot print something unless it is correct. But how would you know that it's correct? So you need 3 years at least in order to go through all of your responsa and read with them and rethink them. Of course, he would never have the time to do that, and he never did it. We do have, it's extremely interesting, we do have, his descendants have the notebooks, or at least some of them. And we can see a very interesting article was published in Hebrew. It can be found online by Rav Eli Fisher and Dr. Tova Ganzel. Rav Eli Fisher is from Modi'in, maybe some of you are familiar. And Dr. Tova Ganzel is a teacher in Bar Ilan, both I think she's in the Tanakh department, and she's also in the Midrashah there. I had the merit to work with her 16 years ago, I guess, in the virtual Bet Midrash. She wrote for us in the virtual Bet Midrash. She wrote shiurim in Sefer Yechezkel, and I had a very side role. There was an editor, so someone had to make sure that the editor would finish his work on time and to have that she would be satisfied with the work. So that was my role. Yeah. Important. Yeah, important. It was important. It was important. So that's so I had known her a little. So and they published an article, I think already 2 articles, by mining this treasure of the handwritings of David Tzvi Hoffmann and seeing the difference between the handwriting and what the final edition that was printed. And from the notebooks, you can see that he was always rethinking his positions. So he would add references, he would delete, he would omit things, and he would change he would reverse some of his opinions during his lifetime. And now what was printed is only the bottom line, but it is extremely interesting to see how such a gown is operating in real time. In most of them in Hebrew, but sometimes the questions would come in German. And also when they would quote someone, because someone gave a testimony, someone gave an edut, then it would be written in Hebrew letters, but I guess it was Yiddish or their jargon of Yiddish. The latest edition of the Melamed להועיל, they translated everything to Hebrew, so even I can read. So that's the edition that I use. Okay, so he never got around to really working on them for 3 years. How would he have the time for 3 years? He was the Rav of the rabbis of Germany. He was writing answers to everywhere. He did not have time to go through his old writings. But his son just printed what was the final version that came out of his hands. Now I would like to read with you the introduction of David Tzvi Hoffmann himself. It's a little long, but I think it's really worth our while. So, he says, he begins with something. I wouldn't read it. I didn't quote it here. I would begin to read in a few seconds. I'll just say what is the background. So he begins, as many authors, when they write their introduction, they write, I apologize for printing the book because there are so many books already. Why there is a need for another book? And then they begin to explain why there is a need to another book. So he says, many people nowadays is Germany 19th century, or the end of 19th century, many people nowadays are, they dislike the old methods of pilpul in which Torah was written for 1,000 years. And they say that one word of critic, now here when you say critic, you know that the word critique can mean different things. So it can mean to criticize someone, can be to put him down. That's how we use it usually. But in academic circles, when you speak about critique, it's not necessarily to put something down, it's to evaluate it in scientific methods. So if I'm critiquing, that with the word critique, critiquing, if I'm critiquing a certain text, I'm not necessarily putting it down, but what I try to see is what is its origin, who wrote every word, when, why. So I'm trying to scientifically evaluate the text. That is the meaning of the academic critique. And it says Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffmann, in our times, that is modern times, in the new science. So people see pilpul as something of old, as something that is false, because it does not really relate to the situation, to the historical situation as it was, and instead it is trying to create new things. That is what pilpul is all about, and into a sense, that is what Torah learning is about. You're not just trying to understand what Rabbi wrote, or what Rav Ashi wrote, or what the Na'bdו wrote. You are trying to think everything anew and to produce your own understanding, of course, of the wisdom of Torah, but your own letter, as we say, in Torah. Now, again, for us, that may be simple. But in Germany of the 19th century, that is just false. That is just false, because that is not trying to understand what the Gemara editors had in mind when they wrote the Gemara. If you want to understand what they had in mind, you have to research, you have to study the social and physical reality of Babylon in the 5th century, in the 4th century. You have to separate what was written in one place in Babel and in a different place, and what came from Eretz Israel, and what maybe was miscommunicated, and that's part of critique. Maybe Rav Ashi didn't correctly understand the Mishnah. Now, again, for us, that is a chilul hakodesh to say certain thing. But if you are scientifically researching, then yes, scientifically everything is possible. I mean, you cannot assume anything. You have to check everything. And he says, so some people completely disregard pilpul anymore, being the old ways of learning. Again, pilpul can mean many things. Here, he used pilpul just as the old way of Torah learning. That is the traditional way of Torah learning. And he says, and these people would prefer bikoret, that is the Hebrew word. They would prefer bikoret, scientifically learning. Now, it's very interesting that he writes that, because he himself, he is an expert in scientific reading of rabbinical texts. And he says, I know these people. I know them up close. Some of them may be my students. Some of them are my colleagues. And he says, הניסיון מעיד. So life shows שהאנשים אשר השליכו אחרי גבם הלימוד בעיון, בדרך אשר דרכו בו גאוני בתרי, הרי הם הנודע יהודה, רבי עקיבא איגר, חתם סופר וכיוצא באלו, הנה האנשים ההם אשר רק ביקורת היוותה נפשם, מהם בקרו ופקרו וחתרו אחר היתרים להתיר איסורים. He says, I know these people which say they are only after science, only the scientific learning of Torah. Many of them, while that's what they say, and they have no agenda, only science. So they threw away the way of Torah be'iyun, the traditional way, and they are only learning the science of Judaism. What is the German word? Help me. Wissenschaft, right? So they are only science. They have an agenda. Their agenda is to be matir asurim, right? Meaning to allow, to permit what is asur, what is forbidden. That's what we are trying to do. So they are trying to deconstruct, that's a modern word, but to deconstruct the Talmud, to deconstruct halacha, and in the end, you deconstruct everything and you are remaining with a pile of rubble. That's what they are after, knowingly or unknowingly, but that's what they are doing. So he says, ומהם, some of them, שכחו תלמודם, אחרי אשר העלו איזה גרגירים בדרך הביקורת, וזה וזה לא עלת בידם. So some of them, they don't really know how to learn. They forgot how to learn. They don't really are science, the experts in the science of this rabbinical text. So in the end, they are like this koro, the orev. The choral, right, who wanted to sing as a singing bird, and in the end he lost his own voice and he cannot sing like some of the birds that are singing nicely. So that's what happened to them, he says. So, and again, we know that it's a phenomenon to this day of people that write under this cover of science of rabbinical texts, and you read what they write, and obviously they have no understanding. Some of them cannot read Hebrew. Now, that's amazing. That's something very new. I mean, back then, at least, they knew that if you want to present yourself as a scholar of rabbinical text, you should be able to read Hebrew or Aramaic. But nowadays, you have scholars, and the Americans would excuse me, but I guess it's part of the decline of the academy in the States in general. But you have people that present themselves as scholars of rabbinical texts, and they only read translations. You can see it very easily that they do not read Hebrew. I don't know how can you present yourself as a PhD. it's amazing to me, and you are unable to read the text about that you are studying in the original text. I mean, can someone imagine? But I think that nowadays there is. But can you imagine being a scholar of Homeros, right, Homer, without being able to read the Greek? That's to me, it's a joke. But I think that's how things are. That's the way that they are moving right now. So anyway, so these people that present themselves as scientists, but in truth they are not learners and not scientists. They know neither. רק מעטים המה, it says there are only selected few, אשר מצאה ידם ללכת דרך קדימה, לעסוקי שמע תעליבא דהילכתא, אחר אשר נסתבכו בסבך בקרני הביקור. So he says, only selected few can both learn in the scientific method, but also find a way to learn a sugia and to reach a halachic conclusion, an acceptable halachic conclusion. So holding both, he says, that is something rare. And as you would explain in his akdama, that is what he is intending his book to be. Something that would show how to combine what is the way to be the master of both. But it is very telling that is not the sefer that was published. As I mentioned, he did not publish his own book. It was published posthumously. Posthumously, thank you. After his death. Humorously is another word, right? It was written it was published after his death. And only the halachic answers, or more, 95% of the sefer is only the halacha. Most of what he is calling here the bikoret did not go in. Which shows you again what we have hinted to and mentioned last week. He was a giant of both Torah and scholarship. The question is not, was he a giant? The question was the road that he was trying to pave a road on which the masses can travel? That was the question. Because what Reb Shimshon Hirsch was trying to do, and successfully, at least to his own generation and the generation after, maybe 3 generations after, he was trying to create a path in which the German Jewry would be able to walk and remain observant and faithful to the faith of their fathers, but also embrace the parts of modernity that are allowed and maybe even recommended to embrace. And he was able to do so. Again, you can argue, what do I mean when I say to the masses? We have to remember the major part of German Jewry was completely lost. But at least to the people that followed him, it helped. The young generation of these people remained to the large degree faithful. It is not so simple when you speak about Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffmann. Now again, students of the rabbinical seminary, some of them went and became great rabbis. If we speak about, I mean, in very different places, we can speak about Rav Kalman Kahana, and we can speak about, I think, Rav Wolf, the person that established the seminary for girls in Nebrak. Maybe some of you are familiar. It's a very, very known seminary, very Haredi. He was a Talmid of Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann. So you can see it by opening a seminary for girls, right? But on the other hand, very, very strict adherence to halacha, and it became Haredi more and more, what we would now recognize as Haredi, as time passed by. And we have Rav Weinberg, about whom maybe Be'ez Hashem will speak in future meetings, a very different person. And he also is a student, a Talmid of Rav David Tzvi Hoffmann. So obviously great giants of Torah. But is that a path in which, you know, the simple shmelke in the shul, can he go in this path? Can he be a giant of Torah and science? Now, not necessarily. And is it enough to install such a rab if you can produce them in mass, which is another question. But let's imagine even that you can produce en masse this type of people to become the rabbis, this rabbinical, right, rabbiner doctor, Dr. Rabbiner, and you would install them in the shoes. And let's say that they would be, each one of them would be great in Torah and lehavdil great in science. Fine, beautiful. Can the simple man follow them? He can follow a man like Rav Shimshon Falish because Rav Shimshon Falish speaks to him. But if you have something like David Tzvi Hoffmann, then again, what I'm saying now is not chas v'chalila to say anything that is negative, but it's maybe negative about us, the simple people. Right? If I sit in the drasha, it's inspiring and full of speed and a perush to the Torah, like was done by Rav Shimshon Falish. I'm not in the level of Rav Shimshon Falish, but when I go out from the shul, I'm inspired. But if I'm being given a lecture of a scientific nature, very exact, very truthful, but 90% of the shul cannot follow. What are they going out with? They know the Rav is a great man, which is good, by the way. For some people, that in itself is enough. But for many, it would not be enough. And
what were the halachic issues that he was tackling?
Great, a very good question. You're right. You are telling me, go on. And you are correct. And you are correct. You know what? You are right. Let's speak about some of the halachic questions that he was dealing with, and skip the rest of the introduction, which is beautiful, but we do not have the time right now to read. I'll just say one thing, which may inspire some of us. He says, when did he begin to write down his chidushim? Only at the age of 84. Not 84, 48. 48, which is very late, is a late bloomer. And why? He was given a notebook by his son as a gift for his 48th birthday. And he said he saw that as a sign from heaven that he needs to begin to write this. Now, he wrote things earlier, but they were all in German. And he says, on this notebook that I was given by my son, I would write only in Ivrit, only in Hebrew, only in Lashon HaKodesh, because that would stay. He said, I'm now writing in German, but who knows for how long Jews would be able to read German. So it was important for him to write Be'ivrit, which I think is extremely interesting. So that's the notebook that is now in Modi'in somewhere, and that later became the Melamed Le'oil. Okay, so that's I think that's inspiring. Anyhow, let's speak a little about some of the challenges that he was confronting. So we already spoke about the question of putting a yarmulke on when you learn secular studies. He thought that yes, you should, but he was debating it with Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, which in his schools, as part of his takana, they would not wear a kippah, a yarmulke, during secular studies. So very interesting. We spoke about that last week. It's in source Aleph. I don't want to read it. Another very interesting question that he was asked. So you begin to read the question. The question is, can you read the Parsha on Shabbat on Mincha? Now you may think it's someone that woke up late, and maybe the whole minyan woke up late. What did happen there? As you read the tshuva, it becomes clear. The problem was with young people, youth, that had to go to school, to the gymnasium. And the school was open on Shabbat. Only on Sunday they had their day off. But on Shabbat, they were walking to school. And we speak not about the Reform would not send questions. These are Orthodox families, observant families. Their children would attend school on Shabbat. Hopefully they do not write. And hopefully the teacher is allowing them to wait with the homework for Sunday. And maybe if there is a test, an exam, to take it on Sunday. But the problem is they cannot be in shul for the Kriyat Torah. So they daven bichidut. And now after on Mincha, they want to come in and to read the Parsha every week.
It's interesting that they cared enough that they wanted to go read the Parsha.
Their parents, but yes, that is right. And he is writing, well, I would have preferred, obviously, that they would listen to it on Shabbat morning. But as we do want to encourage our youth to attend the schools because they need it for their parnasa, he says it's a mitzvah to teach parnasa. And the only way you can work in Germany, again, that's how he disevaluated it. I would say in our terms, the only way you'll be able to pay your tuitions is if you learn in a college. So there is no other way. Not only college, also high school, gymnasium. So you have to go on Shabbat. And if there is no other way, he was not very much in favor. He ends the tshuva by saying, you know what, Rav Ilzheimer already allowed it, so I won't say anything against it. So they would read on Mincha on Shabbat. There was a whole discussion if you read on Mincha on Shabbat, when? Before Mincha or as part of your reading of the Torah? And what about Haftarah? So he discusses all of that. Extremely interesting tshuva. By the way, the tshuvot are in very simple Hebrew, and it's not easy. You have to sit and learn. It's not something to read before you go to sleep. But it's something that can be managed. He's not going into the internicity, the pilpul in the Gemara. He's giving you the main ideas and the main opinions. Extremely interesting. Another question, which was unfortunately very prevalent then and now. Can you allow a Mechalel Shabbat, someone that is publicly is a Mechalel Shabbat, to join your minyan? Can he be one of the 10? Can he be the Shliach Tzibur? Because he has a yortzeit. And maybe he's opening his store on Shabbat, but he wants to daven, because nowadays we have less of that, I think. Because they would want to join the tefillah, but leading the tefillah, you need to be something of a knowledgeable in order to lead the tefillah. So I think we would have less of that, but we do have. And can they be one of the 7 olim la Torah? All of these are questions that are still haunting us to this day. Now he says, it's very interesting. He says, if you have no other choice, it is allowed. But if you can go to another shul, go to another shul. Very interesting tshuva. What about dodging the draft to the German army? That's an unbelievable sheila. I mean, can you imagine, I don't know, Rabbi Elchanan Spector being given a sheila about, may I dodge the draft to the Lithuanian army or to the Russian army? Of course, you don't have to ask the question, just go, run away. I guess, I don't know percentage-wise, but I would say that many of the Jews coming to the United States in the 19th century, their main goal was to dodge the draft to the Russian army. No one wanted to serve in the Russian army. No Jew, no. almost no Jew in Russia had this idea, we need to be loyal citizens to the Tsar. Why should I be a loyal citizen to the Tsar who doesn't see me as equivalent in any way, having equal rights? So in other parts of the world, that was a ridiculous question. And some, I would say, unfortunately, some of the descendants of the people coming from these areas in the world took this mentality also to here. But yeah, that's life. But in Germany, he's being asked, may I dodge the draft? And he says, you are not allowed. Even if you are able to, you must be recruited to the German army. You'd have to be Mechalel Shabbat. Okay, you do whatever is needed. It's pikuach nefesh, and you do whatever is needed. Of course, you try your best. But if it's a pikuach nefesh, it's a pikuach nefesh. And he says, why? Because it would be a chilul Hashem if we would not go to the army. And we know that some of his students were serving in the German army in the First World War. Some of them were awarded with medals. For us, after World War II, the whole thing is, I don't know, it's just it's incomprehensible for me. I cannot fathom what these people were doing. I mean, for me, I can, but it's ridiculous because we know what happened later. Even without that, it's ridiculous. But after we know everything that happened to these loyal citizens of the German Empire, but that is true. And
maybe that was just his public answer.
I can never know what happened privately.
They didn't know about the Holocaust.
No, for sure. But
everything.
But they knew that the German
anti-Semitism already. Okay,
very strong one.
Also, Germany was the leading culture in the world, and so you can discuss. It's too simple to say it's stupid.
No, I didn't say stupid. I say for us it's ridiculous. What they said. No, but you're right. For sure you're right. For sure you're right. But maybe. But in the end, his students were recruited, and as I said, were fighting very patriotically. Russia in First World War, right? And in France, in the trenches, yeah, many of them were killed. And
some got the cross of honor.
Yeah,
they were killed in Auschwitz.
And they were killed in Auschwitz. That's right. Some of them were sent, and they were taking their medals because they believed very naively that they would be protected. And of course, the Nazis made a joke out of it. They took their medals and sent them to the gas chambers. And that's again, we know what how things turned out. You're right.
Even more when they were known.
When the history already happened. Yeah. So that's how things. Now, what is happening? What is interesting with this answer is that while he didn't change, as I know publicly, his opinion regarding being recruited to the German army, he was disillusioned with Germany. I think I mentioned last time that he was asking again and again to get a German citizenship, and he was never given one. Although he was a very faithful citizen, although he was a PhD, he was a lecturer, he was the head of the Jews of Germany. And there is no, and he writes it, he had a personal diary, and he writes it in his diary that it is clearly because he was a Jew. He said the lowest of the Gentiles would have been received a citizenship in my position, and the head of the rabbis will not receive a citizenship in order to humiliate the Jews. And he saw, and his son was also his son that was very German patriotic, also was refused a citizenship in Germany. And then he writes in his, it's extremely interesting, he writes in his diary that he's cursing the government for which, although in the seminary they would make a blessing every Shabbat, and they would have a whole birthday a party in the birthday day of the Kaiser. Thank you, the Kaiser. Again, he was, at least in the beginning, he really believed that it's part of the Jewish duty to be a loyal citizen to his country and to contribute to it. He wrote a whole sefer, and not a sefer, but a Kontres, about the duty of a Shulchan Aruch Jew to be loyal to his country. I think he really, I believe he really thought that. Yeah.
Catholics from Finland,
Mhm.
came from Russia, but they were like the oldest generation of us stolen boys. The other one was a soldier in the Polish army. But yeah, what was my first thought? So my father was his father was Polish, so he didn't have Finnish citizen originally.
Mhm.
And then when Hitler became that he got the citizen, it was like such pride.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
was in 1920.
And again, and think about the people coming to America. Having your American identity was so, it was extremely important to them. Yeah.
Look at the Drusim in Israel, because in their culture they have to be loyal to every country they live in. So they are loyal to the state of Israel. But the Drusim living in Syria
Have to be loyal there, and that.
the safety of their minority to say whatever country state and the honor, and maybe it can be a strategic smart decision at certain points.
Yeah, for sure. No, again, I am not, as I said earlier, I'm not in any place to critique, in any sense of the word critique, Rabbi Hoffmann. I'm just pointing out how history turned out. And he himself, as I said, he wrote that I cannot remember he's cursing the Kaiser himself, maybe that was too much, but the government, meaning so the government as leading the Kaiser astray, I think. And
The host lands. For the Drusim in Israel, it was wonderful because we respect them, we honor them. So it's
for sure, yeah, but that's the difference. That's the difference. Yeah, that's the difference in realities. However, yeah. So
Doesn't your dad both say Adam?
yeah, but
How did he marry?
I don't know. I mean, you're asking me a very specific question. I don't know how he translated this. Yeah, for sure. We have to see. Maybe he didn't believe in believe, but he did want. Yeah, no, not in precarious, in the government, in the sense of loving them. But he thought that we should be loyal. However, in World War, he saw World War I as a heavenly punishment to the Kaiser and his government for the way they treated the Jews. And as you know, they were thrown after the war by the Democrat Party and the Socialists of Germany. And he saw that as a punishment. It was not so much for the Democratic Party, but because he was a conservative. But he thought that the Kaiser was punished because he let himself to be led by these anti-Semitic elements of Germany. Now, again, little did he know that these elements were not punished, but on the contrary, they were gaining steam, and a few years later, they would take control of the whole country to the extent that the Kaiser government would be seen as as a pink dream. So that's how life is, that's how history is. And as many other German Jews, he did not, and as in any other Jews in the world, I think, they were not able to fathom what is coming upon them. What did happen was, as he was disillusioned by the German government, he began to encourage his students to make Aliyah. Now, it's a very complex story. Was he a Zionist? He was in letter communications with some of the Mizrahi leaders. They asked him for support. He never showed public support. He did tell some of his students to join the Mizrahi. On the other hand, he was one of the heads of the Aguda, which was publicly anti-Zionist in the time. So it's very difficult to make sure of his position. Maybe he didn't have a position. Maybe he didn't want to publish a position. He was all for unity in that sense. So he was Mekarev everyone. So I think that sometimes he's being presented as Zionist. I think that's wrong. He was not a political Zionist, that's for sure. He was for sure encouraging Aliyah, but Aguda also was encouraging Aliyah. You don't have to be a Zionist in order to encourage Aliyah. Zionist is about taking control, political control, of creating a political entity. Making Aliyah, that's about living in the Jewish homeland. So these are two distinct questions. And he was very much in favor of the second and very unclear about the first. the only thing that we didn't cover, and I don't want to push to next week, I want to continue. So I will just mention now in 2 minutes, I would allow myself, because we were late in 10 minutes in the beginning of the show, so I'm allowing myself to delay our ending in another 2 minutes. And that is this perush on the Torah, which is an amazing feat that was, to my knowledge, was never done before and never done after. That is openly criticizing the critics. And here I say criticizing. And that was, he took openly to negotiate with the position held by mainly the Protestants, right, the Christians, that were critiquing the Old Testament, right, the Old Testament. And they were saying that, I mean, you know that Christians have many problems with the Torah. I mean, I don't have now to explain their position, but they have problems because they don't like mitzvot. It's part of their tradition, their religion. They don't like practical mitzvot. So it's a big question. Why would God give such a sefer Vayikra, all of it Tuma v'Tahara? There are no lofty ideas that you can speak about unless you are a darshan in a shul, but they are not darshanim, so they don't know what to do with it. So they're stuck. And in the 19th century, there is a new idea, a brave new word, and that is, let's say that Sefer Vayikra was only, it's not part of the original Torah given by Moshe from God. It was composed in the beginning of the Second Temple. Now, to us, again, it's a ridiculous idea, and I'm not here to defend it because it's undefendable, and the science of Bible, even the critics of it nowadays admit that the whole theory was ridiculous. But back then, it was extremely, it was part of science. That is what is called Torat HaTeudot, the documents hypothesis that was advanced by, yes, no, not the Catholic Church, but you're right. There is no Protestant church, but it was very strong in these circles. In the 70s, yeah. Nowadays, I think it's completely discredited. I think nowadays it's completely discredited, even in the scientific circles.
There's a lot of, I took a course in university, professor did indeed believe, and he was Jewish, that the book was written, the 5 books for sure divided, totally written by somebody else.
Oh, again, I'm not saying that all the professors are now religious and go to, no, I'll be clear. But the certain assumptions made by, it was, many people were engaged in that, but the most famous of them is Volhuisen, which is a German researcher. And what he wrote was like a Torah Sinai. The Torah Sinai is not Sinai, but Volhuisen is a Torah Sinai. Everything that he wrote was, that's science. That is science. For us, it is clear the distinction between humanities and real science, and we know better, I think, nowadays. But back then, everything that science said was, if it is being said in university, it is correct. And Hoffmann took upon himself to really answer, but not answer like, you are all stupid and we are geniuses and we will sit in yeshiva and not read your things, which is what most Orthodox Jews did, right? In Eastern Europe, they did not read what was written by Volhuisen and they get good answers. They ignored, which is the Jewish way. So they just ignored, and everything was nice. But in Germany, that's often believed that you cannot ignore it because the youth are going to Goyish schools and universities, and you have to give them a response, an answer. Just as if you are now attending a college or a university in the States, I think you must have what is called now in Israel education, because otherwise you're just leaving the fold to all the false information that is walking around, right? So you must give either you do not send him there, but if you send him there, he needs to have the ammunition to be able to answer. There is no other way. Otherwise, you just, I mean, if you leave the table only to the other side, if you leave the game only to the other side, then they win. And that was what was happening. So Radat Hoffmann said, I cannot just write, they are all anti-Semitic, they are all stupid, and that's what it is. Because, I mean, these are serious people. The people that were engaged in the science of the Old Testament are serious people. You cannot just completely disregard them if you know them. So he taught in the seminary, what was later published as Sefarim, as books. He taught Tanakh in a way which is extremely traditional, but which is taking into account all the scientific critique of his day, obviously, of his day. Archaeology was almost non-existent. So that's a very major development that he didn't take into account because it was not in his days. But literature, literary critique was, and he's heading it head on, he's facing it head on, quoting by names, showing the errors. For example, saying that Vayikra was composed in the beginning of the Second Temple is ridiculous. Why? Just one example, because it has so much on the Aron HaBrit and the Choshen HaMishpat, which is said explicitly in Nehemiah and Ezra that they didn't have. So how can you say that it was written in era? Now, again, everything can be said. That's why history is not a hard science, it's a soft science. So no, it was written about the Aron HaBrit in order that you would fall into the trap and believe that it was written earlier. So there's no end to this type of argumentation. The question is, can you convince? That is the question, not can you prove? And his arguments are very strong. His arguments are very strong. And his book, he wrote a whole specific book against Wollhuisen called the best proofs against the documentary hypothesis. And I think that is read up to this day by students of Bible critique in universities. Again, not as a religious document, as a scientific document, which is extremely interesting. His perush on the Torah we have on Bereshit, we have on Dvarim, we have on Vayikra, and we have on half of Shmot, I think. Bamidbar, I think, it does not exist, and Shmot only half. But it was written in German. It was his notes to his lectures. It was published, and it was translated, and it is sold by Musad Rav Kook. Extremely interesting. By the way, not everything is against the critics. There is also many just beautiful pirushim of someone that was very strong in the science of literature, being able to read, but also erudite, you said, right? Erudite, expert in all of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, in Talmud Bavli, in Talmud Yerushalmi. How many people are there that are experts in both fields? You can count them on one hand. So it is extremely interesting. I highly encourage you. The link, I will try to find something in English, but I highly recommend taking. Unfortunately, Mishpatim is the last one on Shmot. So you'd have to wait for Vayikra if you want on his Parshat HaShavua things. But a beautiful commentary. And just a little long because it's, again, Germany of the 19th century. You cannot write just few sentences. You must write 5 pages about everything. Okay, that's the laws of the game there. But a beautiful commentary. So that we would end up with that. As I said, he was disillusioned. So I think that's important to return to, with his relationship with the German culture and government. He was, I think that to the last of his days, he was not disillusioned with his belief that science and Torah can be married, and to the extent that science should be used in order to learn Torah better, not on the expense of the Iyun way, because I said there is no way you can disregard Iyun, but to enhance and to improve, and in that is, in some senses, a lone star in our skies, but a star that is leading the way for some people how to walk and where you can, what the destinations can you reach. So thank you so much. And Emir Hashem would continue next week with another one of our great rabbis.
Very much.
So now we're sitting in the crossroads of the war history. We don't know what's going to be. Later on, somebody can be very smart and criticize what we did now.
Yeah, for sure. No, again, maybe I was too strong.
Sitting in crossroads of history with a new command. We don't know what's going to
You're right.
And
You're right. But some things are extreme, I think. Some things are extreme. When you see the lengths that the German Jews went for in order to become, part of Germany. So they were naive. It's difficult to ignore it. They were so smart on one hand, so intellectual, so sophisticated, and they couldn't see what is beneath their nose. That's what was so heartbreaking.
But
No one has a crystal ball, and I think that they
Oh,
were,
you could
they
see
were part
fine.
of the most cultured,
Yes.
sophisticated,
Modern,
modern nation in the world.
They'll
And
be-